Hello, Cleo.
Sugar sure makes tea.
Nice job quieting down. Welcome to this sacred space. My name is Edris, Harrell, and on behalf of First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, Delaware, I welcome you to our worship service. All are welcome, regardless of your identity, your spiritual path, or whom you love. For those of you visiting in the sanctuary, please stop by the welcome table in Parish Hall after the service. For those of you online, you're invited to click on the visitor card that is in the chat. Before we greet one another, I invite all of us in the sanctuary to turn to the camera on your left and wave to our friends online. Now, please turn to your neighbor and greet each other with radical hospitality. Today, we are just a few days from Election Day. And for many of us, we feel like we are standing at the edge of a cliff, and we're anxious to know if we'll be falling into a tumultuous future or if we will be pulled back to some stability. This morning's service about navigating uncertain thresholds in life may be what we need to get through this coming week. Today is also the start of our Guest at Your Table program this year, and we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Guest at Your Table, a program that supports the work of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, the UUSC. Our church has participated in Guest at Your Table for at least 46 of the 50 years. We will learn more about it during the stewardship moment later in the service. And now, let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Seth, thank you so much for that music. Sometimes music can feel medicinal, right? And that certainly was my experience. I want to offer a special welcome to any new grandmother that might be in the congregation this morning. For those who've traveled across the country to join us today, and with a little bit of envy in my voice, I want to welcome back those who've come back from La Patria di mia madre, Italia. So welcome, and for this day, for this time of worship. This morning, our call to worship will be a sung worship. I'll sing it through once, and then Cindy and I will invite you to sing along with us. Ready? Now, let me tell you now that the second time and the third time that we'll sing it, we'll have some movements to make with it. That's optional, but you're going to find yourself wanting to do it anyway. So, in body or spirit, please rise as we do our call to worship together. Love, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true. With thanksgiving will be a living sanctuary for you. Everybody now. Love, prepare me to be a sanctuary, thanksgiving will be a living sanctuary for you. One more time. Love, prepare me to be a sanctuary, pure and holy, tried and true, with thanksgiving will be a living sanctuary for you.
For those of you at home, if you have a chalice, I invite you to join me by lighting it as I read these words by Florence Capello. We kindle this flame, honoring the doorways in our souls, the windows through which we gaze at one another, the balconies where we catch glimpse of sky, the thresholds we stand on this morning, wondering, hoping, fearing, dreaming. Please rise and body your just as long as I have breath.
Just as long as I have breath, I must answer yes to life. Though with pain I make my way, still with hope I meet each day. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to life. Just as long as vision lasts, I must answer yes to truth. In my dream and in my dark, always that elusive spark. If they ask what I did well, tell them I said yes to truth. Just as long as my heart beats, I must answer yes to love. Disappointment pierced me through, still I kept on loving you. If they ask what I did best, tell them I said yes to love.
Please join me in affirming our mission. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirits, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
What's going on over there?
I don't know. It looks like Santa's reindeer are up to something again.
Hey, what are you reindeer up to?
Yeah, what's with the books and money?
We're helping Ilya out by purchasing children's books. Ilya, which stands for Independent Living for Young Adults, holds a holiday giving event each year to get gifts for young adults who have aged out of foster care. This year, the First Unitarian Church members are purchasing children's books and making money donations.
Oh, I heard about that. On November 17th and 24th, members at First U can purchase books at the Ilya table, make a donation, and also wrap gifts for Ilya.
It must be hard for young adults who are no longer in foster care, especially during the holidays.
I hope we can give them the sense of love and support by giving generously during the holiday giving event.
We'll be there to help out.
I can't wait to wrap some gifts.
And I hope all of you will give generously to Ilya November 17th and 24th too.
So let us take this time to join together for a time of prayer and meditation called today Lamentation. Walter Brueggemann, the scholar of the Hebrew prophets, says that lamentation is a way to look for hope in the midst of things not being just fine. One of our speakers during this summer's live stream summer camp, Reverend Retta Morgan, encouraged us to practice wailing. Was anybody else there? Wailing. Not to be confused with those big fish. Wailing is a form of lamentation without words. In wailing, we make a sound suggestive of a mournful cry. I'm out of practice. How about you? Let's just practice a little bit ourselves right now, a little wailing. What would it sound like? Okay. This is an ancient form of prayer. You might think it's below you. But I know grown men who did some wailing when their favorite team lost the World Series. Think of the sounds that they made without any accompanying words, but just think of that sound of wailing and recognize that that wordless place from within us expresses our concern, our deep concern, and our anguish at times. Think of the wailing of any of our ancestors who faced uncertainty, who faced what seemed like despair. Let us take a moment to hear their cries within us and among us this moment across the ages as their wailing reaches our ready soul. And let us take some time to hear that sound within us and among us as we linger today with our own experiences of this moment in our lives and this moment in our history. Is there some wailing that wants to get expressed? Yes? So as we are approaching the end of a significant, seemingly endless election period in our country, let us hold in our heart those who feel most vulnerable and most impacted because of their gender, because of their gender identity, because of their health care status, because of their age. And may we hear their wailing and join their wailing with our own right now. Let's wail together for just a moment. And let us hold in our heart those who feel insulated, isolated, or not impacted because of their current situation. They have imagined comfort and security and righteousness. May we recognize with them as well. And the wailing, though suppressed, might still be within them as well. May we recognize with these words of the social prophet and pastor, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that there is an illusion of separateness, that hardness only closes the heart rather than opens it. King said that in a real sense, all life is interrelated. All are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one affects all indirectly. I can never be, he wrote, what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. So as we pause in the shared silence that follows, may we take a moment to truly sense this inescapable network of mutuality that ties us together, that binds us together in a single garment of destiny. So may it be. Amen. What particular concerns are you sitting with today that you are holding maybe close to your heart, or maybe they are just right here in front of you? What weighs you down? Either concern for yourself, for another, or our wider world. Let's take a moment and attend to whatever it is that we're holding in our heart and that our heart is holding. And in a moment, I'll ask you to share those aloud in this room, or if you're online, in the chat. So, what concerns would you like to share in this room so that others can hold it alongside of you today, during this week, and in the days ahead? Did I hear the election? Okay. What else?
People affected by storms and fires.
That the homeless will not be left behind.
Behavior when Trump is president is pretty foul overall.
Domestic violence.
War in the Middle East.
All refugees and asylum seekers.
So let's hold our hands out like this and let's imagine feeling the weight of not only what we're holding in our own heart, but the weight that others are also carrying, so that together we may carry this alongside of each other and with one another and bring it into the presence of love, to the presence of justice, and to the presence of compassion that includes our being that presence in the world right now. Let's not leave this time without also sharing at least like one joy that can be in our heart alongside of whatever else is there. Is there a joy that someone wants to share? Okay,
Extra hour of sleep.
Yeah, you all look so well rested today. Okay, what else? United Family, yeah.
The bald eagle that I saw on Milltown Road and also full rainbow.
Nice. We weave our joys and our sorrows together and feel woven together by our care and our love for one another. Let's continue our time of prayer and meditation through this musical meditation time.
I'll be reading an excerpt from A View from the Edge, which is adapted from Joan Halifax. There is a small cabin in the mountains of New Mexico where I spend time whenever I can. It is located in a deep valley in the heart of the Sangre de Cristo Range. It is a strenuous hike from my cabin up to the ridge at more than 12,000 feet above sea level, from where I can see the deep cut of the Rio Grande, the rim of the ancient Valles Caldera volcano, and the distinctive mesa of Pedernal. Whenever I walk the ridge, I find myself thinking about edges. There are places along the ridgeline where I must be especially careful of my footing. To the west is a precipitous decline of talus leading to the lush and narrow watershed of the San Leonardo River. To the east, a steep rocky descent toward the thick forest lining the Trampas River. I am aware that on the ridge, one wrong step could change my life. From this ridge, I can see that below and in the distance is a landscape licked by fire and swaths of trees dying from too little sun. These damaged habitats meet healthy sections of forest in borders that are in sharp places, wide in others. I have heard that things grow from their edges. For example, ecosystems expand from their borders where they tend to host greater diversity of life. I have come to see that mental states are also ecosystems. These sometimes friendly and at times hazardous terrains are natural environments embedded in the greater system of our character. I believe it is important to study our inner ecology so that we can recognize when we are on the edge. Edges are places where opposites meet, where fear meets courage and suffering meets freedom, where solid ground ends in a cliff face, where we gain a view that takes in so much more of our world, and where we need to maintain great awareness lest we trip and fall. Our journey through life is one of peril and possibility, and sometimes both at once. How can we stand on the threshold between suffering and freedom and remain informed by both worlds?
Thank you, Edris. Someone in the congregation asked me recently, "How are you doing?" And without even thinking, I found myself saying, well, I'm feeling a little on edge as I try to figure out what I will preach on the Sunday before and the Sunday after the election. Oh, you'll find something inspirational to say, they said. At a dinner party one Friday night with friends from my spouse's Quaker meeting, one of the women asked me, "So, do you know what you're going to be preaching on during the election time? Or do you just speak off the cuff? How long does it take you to prepare a sermon?" So I found myself saying, well, it's never off the cuff. And I was tempted to say, but I didn't, it takes a lifetime to write a sermon. I continued, however, it's not how long it takes necessarily, it's how deep I need to go. Sometimes I have to dive in for a while before I know what it is I actually have to offer. This election time is quite hard to prepare for, and it has required a lot of standing on the shore before even diving in. It feels like an unprecedented and momentous time to be standing before you this morning. When talking to some Unitarian Universalist clergy this past week, I polled them on how are you holding your responsibility for these upcoming Sundays. One colleague shared that he decided to preach this Sunday on solitude and hermits. I instantly realized I had missed my opportunity to what seemed to be esoteric and elusive. Maybe there was a part of me that was actually envious of his topic, or that he could preach that on this Sunday. He did go on to explain that he had encouraged his congregation not to look at the news or read the polls on these days leading up to the election as a way to care for them. I agree that doom scrolling doesn't help us get through this any easier. I remember, however, one Sunday in late August when we were on vacation in the Jersey Shore, our television screens were constantly displaying the horrific stories of those trapped in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina. It weighed so heavy on my heart, not just because I had spent some of my earlier life in New Orleans, but also because of the heartbreak, the outrage at the delayed response, and the grief of it all. I went to a church. It happened to be an Episcopal church, which is incidental to the story. I just wanted to be in church. I didn't want to hold the complexity of these emotions alone. Throughout the whole service and the whole sermon, not a single mention of what was happening as a result of Hurricane Katrina was mentioned that morning. I spoke to the visiting priest and I shook his hand following the service. And you know, I tend to be very polite. Just say yes. And indeed, I was polite in expressing what I was experiencing to him. I said, I was surprised that you didn't mention anything about what is happening in New Orleans. I tried to say it in as curious a way as I could, inviting his response. He simply said, I avoid preaching on current events. I took it in. My heart sank even more. The experience did not leave me quickly, obviously, and given the immense neglect that was already happening on the ground in New Orleans that very day, it felt like another opportunity of neglect. Whatever his message had been in his sermon that morning evaporated for me at that very moment. I still can't recall it, and the clearer message was the one I took away from that interaction. I guess it's all a matter of perspective. But I felt my soul wanted some moments, however brief, of lamentation that morning. You know, spiritual bypassing is a thing. How many of you have heard that? Okay, yeah. So the author of a book on the subject says that spiritual bypassing is avoidance in holy drag. It's a way in which we might spiritualize that which is begging to be materialized right in front of us. So it's a tendency to maybe avoid that which must be spoken, but thinking that we're above, beyond it. And we couch it in a way that doesn't allow us to enter the intensity of that particular moment with eyes wide open. Of course, it is a given that as a congregation we have to abide by the rules of not endorsing a particular candidate, which of course I will not do. And perhaps you don't know that in this country, the Puritans instituted an election day sermon in 1630. Some of us were there. Over time, congregations have moved their sermons to the Sunday or the Sabbath before an election rather than election day. One scholar says that the style of the election sermon was often called a Jeremiad, after the prophet Jeremiah, who pronounced words of caution and lamentation for the sin of God's people. The election sermon was the most elaborate and important of several kinds of political sermons, the author continues, that fulfilled this purpose, including days of fasting and prayer, humiliation, thanksgiving, and covenant renewal. No worries. I'm not going to encourage days of fasting and prayer. However, this year, I'm certainly ready to pull out all the stops. I really am. So please feel free to engage in any of those other practices. But somewhere between spiritual bypassing and an election day sermon, there has to be a place where we acknowledge what is happening. You can apply what I have to say this morning to this unprecedented election or other times in your life when you're holding some anxiety and some concern. In a time or times of intense uncertainty where you had some worry about where is this all leading, what will be the outcome. I just happen to be using the election as an illustration. Some preachers I recognize today might be talking about the times that we are in as end times. Although it is very tempting to get apocalyptic this morning, I'm going to back off from that. And instead, I want us to reflect on edge times. It was present in the reading that Edris shared with us. I have determined that in edge times like these, we can be on edge, over the edge, or at the edge. We will all hold edge times in different ways, and we might shift from one way or another over the course of time. I happened to be talking with a psychiatrist this week. Well, let me say it another way. That's a little, you'll get the wrong idea. I was conversing with a psychiatrist this week about being a speaker at our congregation. I happened to mention to him that I felt that there was a lot of anxiety leading up to the election. And he reported to me that he isn't feeling much anxiety about the election, that he realizes that he'll have to cope with whatever the result is. That was such a reasonable response. But honestly, if you were listening to my inner dialogue, I was asking myself, what kind of drugs is he on? I told him that I found myself doing a lot of magical thinking. He did agree that many people are anxious. Just a brief reality check. Am I right about this? Aren't people feeling a little anxious, at least, about this election? Thank you. One commentator from the Boston Globe confirmed my feelings, our feelings, when he wrote yesterday that we're entering the last days of a season of contention and of mystery, upheaval and dread, a time when the country could lurch in entirely different directions or completely lose its way. So I know that I'm not alone in feeling the poignancy of this moment, and I know that we all are going to hold it differently. One thing I've noticed during this election cycle is that there's some new vocabulary being described, and it's a way to deal with our tendencies sometimes to want to normalize and maybe even spiritually bypass the moment that we are actually in. Take the new word this fall, sane washing. Sane washing. One writer describes sane washing as a tendency among journalists to launder some of a candidate's wilder or barely coherent statements to make them seem like the cogent pronouncements of a typical politician. I think the impact is that we normalize in order to somehow numb ourselves to what would have in previous years seemed so inconceivable and so unacceptable as communication. In addition to normalizing and numbing, another phenomenon is what is being called neutral or neutralizing. As you know, one major newspaper publisher, which coincidentally happens to be owned by a billionaire, is hoping to continue to have some lucrative contracts with the federal government, declared, after many decades of this paper's pattern, that they were returning to their roots to not endorse a candidate. In my humble opinion, they can stick returning to their roots in the gardening section. I tend to agree with Elie Wiesel, who's speaking from his own grounded experience as a Holocaust survivor and a witness to the atrocities of authoritarian dynamics, who stated that we must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, we must take sides. As a clergy person, it can sometimes feel like I'm supposed to not only appear neutral, but neutered. We sometimes confuse, I believe, the moral issues with the political ones. Most of what is framed as political has within it a lot of moral issues as well. Hannah Arendt, after observing up close some of the authoritarian dynamics of the Nazis, recognized what I think is important for us to recognize in this time that we're in. She believed that moral consistency makes the individual person a single, undivided being, a living force that is not exchangeable with any other. Arendt declared, however, it's better for the thinking person to be at odds with the whole world than to be at odds with and contradicted by themselves. In other words, since the human contains within themselves a partner from whom they can never win release, they will be better off not to live in company with a murderer or a liar. I think we have to be honest with ourselves. I think we need to demand the honesty from others in leadership positions and not brush aside as being neutral or tolerating, normalizing by airbrushing it through sane washing, or to numb ourselves when we need to be wide awake and responsive. Can I hear an amen? Our religious tradition calls forth from us this standing for truth, this struggle for truth, this righting of injustices. We will be hearing this month about the story of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, and their contemporary work is the continuation of the work that Reverend Wasil and Martha Sharp, Unitarians from Wellesley, Massachusetts, did to defy the Nazis and save hundreds of children, while others were avoiding the truth that was well documented about what the Nazis' plans were for Jews, dissidents, and children. Truth is our heritage, my friends. Truth is the heritage of justice and not some elusive ideal. Truth is our defense and defiance of normalizing what should not be normalized. Truth is our defense against pretending to be neutral when we are not. Truth is not numbing ourselves, but stating clearly what it is, what's going on, while it's happening, while it still matters. To live up to these convictions in perilous times means that we will sometimes risk being on the edge, and other times we'll be over the edge, and at other times we'll be at the edge. So let me explain. You know, despite my psychiatrist friend seeming so cool, calm, and collected, when I spoke to him about election anxiety, I believe that today it's okay to also feel anxious and aggravated and annoyed. It's okay with me if you're feeling on edge. As we often say in our welcome period in the worship services, and I'll use that same format, your being on edge is welcome here. Let's all say that. Your being on edge is welcome here. Sometimes if we're feeling on edge, it may not be just about ourselves. It may be a personal experience, but it also might be an empathy, a deeper empathy that we feel for others that might be impacted, and how certain circumstances might impact them differently than ours. So if being on edge is where you are today, I want to acknowledge your experience and embrace it. I genuinely believe that you might be holding this not just for yourself, but the system that we're all a part of. Given the times that we're in, normalizing seems psychologically and spiritually unhealthy. Let's not pretend that if we are feeling on edge or not feeling on edge, that it's all about who we are as individuals. If we're feeling on edge, or not feeling on edge, I should say, it's not a badge of courage necessarily. Now, we also might be feeling ourselves over the edge. If we are over the edge, we move from feeling on the edge to being generally caught in feeling overwhelmed and in an immobilizing fear, so that this overwhelm or fear has us. And it's not just us feeling overwhelmed. Again, I caution us not to rush to judgment if this becomes our own or someone else's experience. Vulnerability may not just be a feeling that we have. Vulnerability may be a reality for us because of who we are and what our circumstances are. Women whose reproductive health care is in jeopardy are not just feeling vulnerable, they may actually and are already vulnerable. Right? Those whose status as human, this is like an amen sign, right? Those whose status as human beings because of their gender identity or sexuality who have been discounted, demeaned, or dismissed may not just feel vulnerable, they are already and are vulnerable. People whose health care is now affordable may not just feel vulnerable, they may be vulnerable if specific proposals are enacted. So again, if at some point now or in the next week or so, you go over the edge with fears or concerns or overwhelm, I will say it again and you'll say it after me, your over the edge is welcome here. And yes, there is this other edge state that we might find ourselves or others in as the days ahead unfold. The state is to be at the edge. I understand it to be distinctly different from on the edge or over the edge. I've discerned that this at the edge experience is also a place to land, as I have read anthropologist and Zen teacher Joan Halifax's book, Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet, which we referred to in this morning's reading. What gives Joan Halifax's perspective credence to me is that she's not just referring to some ideal, blissful, detached, or immune state. She knows it. She's speaking as a Zen teacher. She's speaking as a Zen teacher who's abided with people who are dying, people who are victims of extreme disasters. She's speaking as someone who trains others to be chaplains to those ill, terminally ill, or in some extreme distress. In other words, she's been at the edge with folks at critical times. These times are indeed times of being at the edge. It's not a place of detachment, but of true abiding on that edge of the unknown, between life and death, between breath and breath. Instead of detachment, these at the edge times are times for us to take more in, time for us to find deeper ways of engagement. She advises her chaplain interns not to ask, "How are you doing?" but to ask sincerely, "How is this for you?" And being with whatever the other person says. So I want to encourage us to do the same in the days ahead as we make sense of this election, as we engage with each other in any way, in any of the edge states that I've mentioned. Whether we do this in words or in just our compassionate presence, may we communicate, "How is this for you?" and await the response. Not impose a response, not try to twist out a response that might not be the genuine response of the other, but just to simply ask, "How is this with you?" So let's practice that. How is this with you? Roshi Joan advises us at these edge times that we engage in 3 practices. Practice not knowing, rather than assuming we do, so that we can open ourselves to what is wanting to happen within us and among us and through us. Let's practice, she says, bearing witness, rather than assuming that we know what another's experience is or ought to be. And let us practice, she says, compassionate action, rather than numb, normalize, or neutralize ourselves into a place of paralysis or inaction. I believe it's important how we are in that current at the edge time that we're in, and at any times that we may be on the horizon for us collectively or personally. Let's hold one another during these times. Let's accompany one another as we move within the states of being on edge, over the edge, and hopefully at the edge. As we move towards and through the days ahead, let's be there for one another. We will all hold and experience the consequences of this election differently, but let's embody our interrelated nature through how we are with one another and how we act together moving forward. Now, we often advise from the pulpit approaching an election, vote your conscience. I want to add something to that. If we normalize what should not be normalized, if we pretend that we're neutral when we really aren't, if we numb ourselves, then we're also eroding our own conscience. So I would say, have a conscience from which to vote. Amen.
Thank you, Larry. Today begins this year's annual Guest at Your Table program, where we learn about the work of our Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, UUSC, and find ways to support that work. As you read in the letter that First U members and friends received last week, UUSC began in 1939 when Martha and Waitstill Sharp left their small children and their church in Wellesley, Massachusetts, to go to Prague, Czechoslovakia, to help rescue intellectuals, artists, Jews, and others targeted by the Nazis. Even though the Sharps had to flee Prague to avoid arrest, the service committee throughout the war from southern France continued to rescue those targeted by the Nazis. The service committee's history is replete with examples of going where others won't, of doing what others will not, of addressing the needs of the marginalized, of taking on what I call the sandpaper issues, those that are too rough for other organizations to touch. We were in Central and South America during the turmoil of the 70s and 80s before the U.S. acknowledged its military involvement. We were in Ethiopia before the world knew there was a famine. UUSC was in Eritrea before the world paid attention to attacks from Ethiopia. We were empowering untouchable women in India before the world took notice. We were partnering in Rwanda before the world responded to the genocide. Our partners were active in nonviolent education efforts in Egypt as the Arab Spring began. We worked with those left behind by the big NGOs after the earthquake in Haiti, then again following Hurricane Matthew, and we're there today with all that Haiti is facing. We're in Turkey with a partner that is helping refugees deal with trauma. We're in Hungary, where Viktor Orban has vilified refugees. We're in Myanmar, where the Rohingya have faced genocide. We're working with indigenous communities under the threat of climate-forced displacement in the Solomon Islands, Kiribati, Alaska, and the Louisiana Bayou. We're in Mexico and Arizona, supporting refugees from the violence in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Our work on migrant justice includes the right to safety in Central America, the right to safety on the migrant trail, and human rights in the U.S. immigration system. As many of you know, Doyle and I have visited with partners in Myanmar, Nicaragua, Hungary, Croatia, Serbia, and more, and have seen firsthand how the service committee's partners are changing lives. 50 years ago, the service committee began a program called Guest at Your Table, and we at First U, as you heard, have participated for 46 years. We invite you today to take your Guest at Your Table box home. Put it on your table as a guest to remind you of the work of the service committee. Then bring it back well-fed, maybe with a big check, on December 8th. There are a lot of organizations to which we all contribute, but the service committee is unique, not only in that instead of sending Americans with answers, it works through supporting and empowering local partners. But also it's unique because it is our Unitarian Universalist human rights organization based upon our UU principles, respecting the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. You, along with UUs across the country, make the work of the service committee possible. Now, as we turn our attention to the stewardship which sustains this congregation, and we prepare to collect the offering for the work of this church, let us repeat together our words of stewardship commitment. to the work of this congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action, we dedicate our lives, and these are offerings.
Thank you, Seth. That was beautiful. We will now extinguish the chalice as I read these words by Carrie Holly Hurt. Love holds you. Love bears witness to all your inherent dignity and worthiness. It witnesses how you try, succeed, and fail, and it does not flinch. Love will not let go. Love holds all of you.
Before we do our benediction together, I just want to make a few quick announcements. As part of our ongoing series of promoting everyday democracy, today, after the service at noon in room 25, we're having a program entitled The Answer to the Decline of Vital News Coverage with Allison Taylor Levine, and it's who has launched Spotlight Delaware, which is a unique collaborative nonprofit local newsroom. Please join them in room 25 if you can. This was described in our e-news and so forth. Just a few things about this week as well. On Wednesday, the day after the election, November 6th, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m., anyone who wants to, we're gathering in the sanctuary and in the parish hall for singing, for music, for snacks, for walking the labyrinth and snacks, for lighting candles and sharing thoughts and feelings and snacks. So come and be with others. Be with others if you'd like to be. Invite neighbors or friends to join you. We're just going to hold that space for one another during that time. And then next Sunday, the 10th of November, at 3 o'clock, we're having a organ recital. So if you needed some more medicine, more music medicine, then join us at 3 o'clock on Sunday, November 10th in this sanctuary. All of the information is in the live stream brochure and in the sound stream cards in the sanctuary. If you're visiting us today, please join us for refreshments and fellowship after the service. Please introduce yourself to me. And let's conclude our service by standing as you are in body or spirit. And first, I want you to practice the posture of strong back and soft front. So imagine yourself having a strong back that's available to withstand anything, but also a soft front that allows you to receive whatever is there. So we'll stay in this posture as we sing this song together. I will sing it through once, and then Cindy and I will help you all to join in as well. I think, are the words on the screen? Okay. I am open and I am willing to be hopeless, which seems so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change, and we'll sing it all better together. I am open and I am willing to be hopeless, would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. Okay, thank you for that. Following our closing hymn, we have a little finale on the screen. You can just hang out as long as you want to watch the finale, and it's meant to boost you a little bit as we approach this week. But then join us when you're ready in the parish hall for a time of fellowship. Our closing hymn is 1018, Come and Go With Me. The words will be on the screen.
Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land. There'll be freedom in that land where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land. There'll be justice in that land where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land. There'll be singing in that land where I'm bound, where I'm bound.
Let's see if we can get this one.